And so when we're talking about Dan, they're running that tried and true Miraidon. They are currently running Miraidon Choice Specs, Whimsicott with a Covert Cloak, Urshifu with Focus Sash, Ogerpon Hearthflame, and then we got Farigiraf with an Electric Seed, of course, to pair up with that Miraidon, and Iron Hands with that Assault Vest. So really kind of like focusing on our Tailwind, setting up and just going through and trying to sweep with that Miraidon with that choice specs. What are your thoughts though?
Yeah, and this is the very standard Miraidon team, right? Where it's the choice specs, and you have like the Whimsicott supporting things like Fergraph, and the Iron Hands are just very, very strong tools in taking advantage of the Miraidon's electric terrain. Not only is Miraidon allowed to set up that terrain, but it's allowed to use it as well, boost up with that Hadron engine, as well as boosting up its electric moves just by being an electric type on the terrain. And then you have tools like the Fergraph with that electric seed, boosting up its defense when it is on the field, setting up, making sure that those strong hits from opposing Iron Hands or Urshifu close combats aren't doing nearly as much damage. Those Wood Hammers and knockoffs from Incineroar and Rillaboom are also not going to be doing as much. Then you have tools like the Iron Hands with Fake Out, and also is just another wall on the team, allowing you to kind of get that positional advantage with the Fake Out. And those drain punches to keep yourself alive. You might even run Volt Switch sometimes if you want to get out of there. But I think between those tools, you have a lot of different options to kind of get your Miraidon in a spot where you want to click attacks. You have the Fake Out, you have to Follow Me, you have the Tailwind, all sorts of different tools. You even have Trickery if you need it.
Oh yeah, you have so many shenanigans, is what I would always say. So many shenanigans that you can run with that team. And I think that's what makes that team so powerful. But I think also talking about powerful, let's talk about Tim Edwards' team as well. We've got that Calyrex Shadow Rider with the Citrus Berry, which is very interesting. Our Clefairy, as we talked about before, we love Clefairy, especially with an Eviolite paired with it. But a newcomer that we have not talked about at all is Mienshao. And when talking about Mienshao, I know one of my dearest friends, Georgia, loves Mienshao and has kind of taught me a lot about it. So I'm really excited to see Mienshao right here. But then also paired with it is our Rillaboom with an Assault Vest, Fluttermane, of course, with that booster energy, and Chi-Yu with running that Covert Cloak. So a very interesting different team for Calyrex Shadow Rider, but one that has a lot of the ability to kind of move things around when you're talking about Mienshao with Fake Out, kind of on that side, Rillaboom as well. And then our double duo, the two that always stick together, Fluttermane and Chi-Yu, to go ahead and try to get through all these teams as quickly as possible. But come on, Tyson, we had to talk about the Calyrex. Tell me a little bit more
Yeah,
about it.
exactly. I was waiting for you. I mean, you talked about when we led off this stream with the Calyrex Shadow Rider and the Clefairy, and I mean, we get to see it round one here with the Mienshao. I think Mienshao is kind of the star here, even more than the Calyrex Shadow, where I think something like the excuse me, I almost called it Urshifu. Mienshao is a lot stronger than I think something like Incineroar in that slot, where not only do you have a fire type on the team already, but I think Mienshao also just fits the tempo of the team a lot better because of its speed stat. It's very, very fast, and it's also opting here. I don't. Maybe this is an error, maybe it's not, but it's actually Focus Band instead of
Oh,
Focus Sash on the Mienshao as well. So it's going to have that 10% chance to live an attack on one regardless. So it's kind of like a repeating Focus Sash, but there's also just a chance it doesn't proc. 90% of the time, your Mienshao just gets knocked out, which is an interesting choice if that is intentional. I guess the idea is that if your Mienshao gets knocked out, then that's a free switch into something like Rillaboom or your Clefairy. But if it does get to stay in, then it gets to fire off close combats and wide guards. So maybe that's on purpose, or maybe I'm like just making stuff up. Who knows?
no,
But
and
other pieces on the team with the Rillaboom, Fluttermane, and the Chi-Yu as well are just great supporting options in that Fake Out, the speed control on assumably a booster speed Fluttermane, and the damage, the big special Beads of Ruin Chi-Yu to support the Calyrex damage as well.
I love Chiyu. I know. It's like a love-hate relationship with Chiyu. Some days I love it when it hits when it hits its heat waves. Some days I'm like I can't do it anymore. We're broken up. But I really do like I am someone who that does run that Fluttermane Chiyu core on my traditional teams, and I'm really excited to kind of see it. I think it's going to be one of those that matchup that we kind of see maybe brought into this set, especially when we're talking about that Miraidon. But I think one Pokemon that would be I don't think will make an appearance, but might possibly is that Mienshao. But I know if we know Tim, come on, Rillaboom has to be a Pokemon that we bring, especially when you're staring down that Miraidon with that electric train. And not only that, but having that Farigiraf with electric seed is also something that's just a little bit scary in my opinion.
Yeah, and as we get into game one, our Swiss round one of our collectors Emporium, Tim Edwards versus Dan Sedman. We're going to get into leads here very soon. As we see Tim lead off, Calyrex Rillaboom, and from Dan getting Miraidon and Whimsicott. Tim immediately setting up the Calyrex as well as Fake Out and that Grassy Terrain, which is going to go last, making sure Tim gets the terrain control here on this turn 1.
That is so fascinating to see both restricteds making their appearance right at the beginning, especially when we're talking about Calyrex Shadow. I feel like a lot of the times for me, I always keep it in the last 2 slots just so that I can move it in at different pivotal times. But I think Tim really understood that, hey, Dan is probably going to leave Miraidon, especially paired with that Whimsicott. Let me bring Rillaboom as well so that they can't go ahead and get that electric terrain right from the jump. And I think that's an incredible strategy, especially knowing how Miraidon is just so powerful into these different matchups and especially into this regulation. But it's going to be very fascinating to see what will that Rillaboom do. Will it U-turn? Will it fake out?
Yeah, as Miraidon switches out here into Iron Hand, so if a fake out comes here, which it doesn't from Tim, instead a light screen from Dan's Whimsicott is going to go up there to mitigate any damage from Tim's Calyrex if he were to fire off an attack. But Tim taking that advantage, being okay with the light screen going up, as long as Tim is able to get a nasty plot, and as U-turn, as you mentioned before, going into the Whimsicott, going to be able to reset that grassy terrain, allowing to reset it whenever Dan brings back a new Miraidon, playing around the fact that Dan might have Farigiraf in the back. You're in an amazing spot here for Tim. Not only do you have your redirection out for Clefairy, but you have a nasty plot on your Calyrex. Even if you do go for a fake out into Clefairy here, what is your Whimsicott really doing to the Calyrex? And if you go for a Wild Charge, because of the Friend Guard and Grassy Terrain, this Calyrex isn't going to take a lot of damage. And with something like the Citrus Berry as well, it's going to be here on the field for a very long time. Dan is kind of an awkward spot where Tim can honestly even set up another nasty plot if he feels like you have this Follow Me on the Clefairy. You do have to be careful about this Encore, but Tim having Protect on both these Pokemon as well, you're kind of able to play around that and Follow Me the next turn.
Yeah, this is very fascinating play. And especially, like you were kind of saying, Tim is in such a fantastic position. And then we see that Anchor going into that Clefairy. So now we're going ahead and making sure that that Follow Me has to continue to happen. But Tim's not worried about that. Tim said, why not 2? And goes ahead and makes that nasty plot read and going ahead and boosting up that Calyrex Shadow. We see that Wild Charge going into that Clefairy, not even doing over halfway. And I do think, like I was kind of saying, Tyson, I feel like Tim is in such a fantastic position, especially when you're looking at this current board state with that Clefairy still locked into Follow Me, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but also there's nothing really threatening, like you were saying, on Dan's side for Tim.
Yeah, I think we can also see here after the Whimsicott goes for a Tailwind here for Dan, kind of trying to set up so the Miraidon is faster than the Calyrex. When your Pokemon get knocked out, the Whimsicott is most likely going down. This is a +4 Astral Barrage, now +5, thanks to that that boost there you're going to get on the Calyrex, thanks to that Grim Neigh. The Miraidon's going to be able to come here under Tailwind, this Wild Charge, not able to do too much damage, definitely going to be in range of whatever attack Miraidon throws out, but the damage is already kind of done. The light screen is up, but Calyrex is at +5. You can bring in Farigiraf here to be immune to something like the Astral Barrage, but and kind of use this last turn to maybe get Iron Hands to knock out Clefairy potentially. But I think the scary thing about this is you can just switch out the Clefairy, or you can keep it if you really want to. You should be able to live. I think the Calyrex is just in such a dominant spot, though. It doesn't matter what this Farigiraf really does here. If you go for Helping Hand, you can guarantee the knockout on the Clefairy, but again, you still have to deal with this Kyrex.
And I feel like Calyrex is just sitting there menacingly, just staring down Dan's Pokemon right now. And I think one of the things that Dan has to keep in mind is that even though he did just set up Tailwind, he still needs to count their turns. Because when we're talking about both these Pokemon running Protect, you can go ahead and start cycling in and out to make sure that whenever that Miraidon comes in, maybe it's not going to have Tailwind to apply that pressure. And if Miraidon doesn't have Tailwind, I'm not sure how Dan can get out of that situation at this point because that Calyrex being +5 is just so dominating in this current ecosystem, especially now with that Terra Fairy going attached to it as well. So we see the translation on Tim's side, Terra Fairy to go ahead and make sure that we resist some of those different types of moves that might be coming its way, especially with that Farigiraf looking it down as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just guaranteeing you the turn. Just in case the Iron Hands was faster and you're able to knock out the Clefairy there with the Tailwind. If you're able somehow super fast Iron Hands, you're able to knock out the Clefairy. Then the Farigiraf to go for something like the Alpha, Kyrex, just terastallizing in case. But Clefairy able to live that psychic noise is just absolutely devastating here for Tim. You know, this thing is on court and to follow me. It can't heal from the grassy terrain, but it doesn't matter. This Kyrex is at +6, and I don't think a light screen is going to stop it from just tearing through this Miraidon, which is going to be Dan's last Pokemon kill. We do see the Electric Seed pop off on the Farigiraf there, but that defense boost is not going to do anything against this Kyrex as we see Dan forfeit this game 1.
Yeah, I think Tim played that masterfully. And then you know what? As someone who did get second place at EOIC in 2024, I think he is showing that he is a competitor that you need to watch out for. Really playing that Clefairy Calyrex core and not even exposing what that last Pokemon that he did have. I think Dan needs to kind of, in my opinion, needs to respect the Calyrex a little bit more to make sure that we can go ahead and start trying to chip away at it and not let it get to that +6 that it was previously. Nasty Plot is one of those moves that you do have to be careful of, especially when we're talking about that momentum that it can really build, especially next to Clefairy with that redirection.
Yeah, and I think even more than Tim just being a great player in general, I think the game plan that he had was just really hard to beat if you're on the other side of Dan, where Dan kind of led Miraidon, which is something you have to do. We kind of talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the game, but I think leading Rillaboom is always going to be correct from Tim there. Just because you're able to get a fake out or potentially terrain, you kind of have to respect the fact that Dan's always going to lead Miraidon or has the option to lead it. You really don't want to let Miraidon get away with the terrain, and you don't want to spend a turn having to switch in Rillaboom. You'd much rather have that active turn, as I like to call it, with that fake out, potentially, or you could just U-turn and force them to switch in for a graph. Whatever option they choose to do, you still have grassy terrain at the end of the turn, and you're able to do something with the Calyrex. And because of its Citrus Berry, that can kind of allude to how maybe this Calyrex is EV'd as well, knowing it might be able to eat a hit or two to guarantee you get that Nasty Plot off. And again, something like the Whimsicott as well, which it only has Moonblast and these supporting moves, you really can't do anything immediately to this this Calyrex that would like want to make it want to protect or attack to kind of get its useful turn off. So Tim kind of realizing that and just able to click Nasty Plot, and then again realizing again that the next turn after you're able to click Nasty Plot again, just put him in a dominant spot. So I think Dan has to take a more active approach instead of something like Whimsicott, just forfeiting speed control off the bat and maybe bringing something like Ogerpon there to threaten the Rillaboom or the Clefairy a little bit more, I think is what I would like to see out of Dan. But we see the same leads from both players here as the grassy terrain is going to be the second terrain here. So Tim's going to get terrain control again, and I get to see the same turn playing out from game 1 of last time as well.
Yeah, I feel like Tim is in, once again, a great position right now. I don't think they really have to worry about not clicking the same exact buttons that they did, using that U-turn, maybe doing that Nasty Plot. Just really go ahead and start beefing up that Calyrex Shadow Rider. I think right here, Tim says, okay, are you going to do the same thing, Dan? Or are you going to kind of try to change it up? And I think Dan is now thinking, okay, I kind of need to figure out what I'm going to do with this Miraidon to get it back so that I can build up that terrain again, especially if they have that Farigiraf in the back to pop that electric seed and make sure that they go ahead and have that. But we do see the Whimsicott running for that same light screen to go ahead and make sure they can kind of protect a little bit. Tim going for that Nasty Plot saying, hey, I'm not really threatened by what you're going ahead and doing. I can eat that, especially when you're talking about having that citrus berry. And we see that, ooh, ooh, my
Yeah,
goodness.
and Tim, again, knowing this is exactly what I was saying. Knowing you're able to live that move there is super, super huge there as your U-turn goes off there into the Whimsicott. If you're Tim, this is like perfectly fine because you get to bring in Clefairy. They can't encore you into something like the Nasty Plot again, and you're also able to redirect that Electro Drift. And now this Miraidon is kind of stuck on the field. And with this Cataract's healing, you're already almost at about half. So this is still a dangerous position for Dan.
Yeah, as you know, I do love Clefairy, and I think Clefairy is very happy on this board state right now, especially right next to its partner in crime, Calyrex Shadow Rider. And now we just have to really keep in mind now that we have that Fred guard up, it's going to make things a little bit more challenging for Dan, especially. He really, in my opinion, needs to get that terrain control ASAP for that Miraidon, because that Miraidon is not going to want to take an Astral Barrage at this point from that Calyrex Shadow Rider. And unfortunately, the Calyrex Shadow Rider is kind of free to do anything it wants because of that follow me from that Clefairy. Not worried about Encore, not worried about anything on that side. And we do see a Terrestrialization going into that Calyrex Shadow Rider, going into Terra Fairy type to make sure whatever hits it is not going to hit it for so much, which is great to see.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense as well if instead of Astral Barrage you go for a different move as well, something like that Draining Kiss potentially. But we see the Miraidon here actually terrestrialize into the Fairy as well. This Miraidon is going to lock into Electro Drift though. I'm curious how much damage it's going to do to this Clefairy without the terrain. Not nearly as much as it normally would, I can say that for sure. Tailwind is going to go off first though to make sure this Miraidon is able to get an attack. And we're going to see exactly how much Electro Drift does to Clefairy. I would assume something like 75%, as we see it play off. Just a lot more than that, more like 90%. And that Draining Kiss there, that Terra Fairy is going to fire off, heal off his Miraidon, forcing that Terrestrialization out of it as well. And now that you know it's Terrestrialized as well, you can go for Astral Barrages once again.
Yeah, I think the Draining Kiss is such an amazing move to run on that Calyrex, especially when we're talking about how Tim has a little bit more of a bulky Calyrex with that. So with talking about that little bulk, they've already used the Citrus Berry, which is understandable, but still sitting next to that Clefairy that has Friend Guard. What is Tim really worried about this turn? Honestly, he might not have the speed control now that Tailwind is up, but like you've kind of said, that Whimsicott is really not threatening anything on this board state, and the only real threat is Miraidon. And truthfully, Clefairy could just wave its little finger in the air and do that follow me once again to make sure that nothing is going in that direction of that Calyrex Shadow Rider.
And this is exactly why I think something like Whimsicott is a little bit of an awkward one. Yes, you get the Tailwind, yes, you get the Light Screen, but those, and even the Encore, but those turns are just turns where you're not doing any damage to the Clefairy or the Calyrex. You're not able to do much in that scenario. Yes, the Moonblast goes off again with the Calyrex, but the damage has kind of been done. You do get a special attack drop there in the Calyrex, which will be nice, but Astral Barrage is going to fire off here, and that might matter a little bit as the Miraidon and Whimsicott are able to live because of that special attack drop. That's kind of big there, man.
Yeah, I think that Whimsicott going for that Moonblast and getting that special attack drop is fantastic for Dan. I think it allows for them to have a little bit more momentum, and we see that Rillaboom coming out on Tim's side to go ahead and say, hey, I'm back. Did you miss me? Possibly being able to do maybe some fake out, maybe some shenanigans with U-turn, different types of things that we might want to see. But we see that Dan is also going to go ahead and switch in that for a grab to saying, hey, if you want to go for fake out, you can, but I'm going to punish you for it right now.
And I think this is fine as well because, you know, Whimsicott has to come in eventually again. So, yes, you stop the fake out from this turn happening. You know that Tim is just probably going to click fake out Astral Barrage anyways, because that means that's one less attack that the Whimsicott is doing, that's one less Encore that they're doing. And you can just kind of get away with attacking here if you're Tim. The Miraidon is so low, and whatever comes in is going to take so much damage. In this case, it's the further off, so nothing at all from Astral Barrage. But you could also just go for a Protect there, and this is also a really smart play if you're Tim. You could just go for a straight up attack into the Rillaboom or potentially a U-turn as well, and I really, really like this play.
Yeah, I think Tim played that actual turn beautifully, saying like, "Hey, I know you're probably gonna try to get rid of my Calyrex Shadow Rider, but like, why would I not just protect?" And that's what exactly Tim does, and does the U-turn into that Rillaboom to bring out Fluttermane. Of course, our tried and true Fluttermane, who is sitting very, very comfortably in this board state, especially with that photosynthesis going off, having that speed heightened. And Tyson, how many more turns of Tailwind do we have? I think
I
two,
believe we have one or
maybe
two
two.
more turns of Tailwind left.
Look at that.
One, it looks like my first instinct was correct.
Dan the man showing us
this,
that.
this perfect positioning here from Tim. Even if you are able to switch out Miraidon into something that Whimsicott kind of get in for free, you have something like the Speed Booster Fluttermane on Tim's end to just kind of regain a speed control, as well as that Rillaboom in the back, just in case the Miraidon wants to switch out. If you're Tim, the way we kind of talked about at the beginning of the stream, but being able to have control of this terrain the entire game just mitigated a lot of the damage as Miraidon was able to do. So between that and the Clefairy, I think Tim has done a great job at preventing the damage come out from the board. As we see, Calyrex forfeit its boost, actually, and switching to Rillaboom here to take something like the Electro Drift, allowing something like the Fluttermane here to do tons of damage, potentially getting a knockback kill for the Miraidon if it turns that slot. Electro Drift maybe doing a third to the Rillaboom there. Moonblast actually goes to the Ferragraph, maybe to try and get some chip, as the Trick Room goes off there when that last turn of Trick Room is completely done.
Wow, very interesting play by Dan. And I think this is not something that is very bad to see. I know that Whimsicott and that Miraidon are still kicking. However, as we've kind of seen on Dan's side, is that we have that Ogerpon in tow in the back. And so Ogerpon is going to love coming into this board state if it possibly can, especially now when we're seeing that Trick Room. Because as we both know too, on Tim's side, they're a little bit speedy over there. And now that Tim doesn't have that Clefairy, it's a little bit more of a tricky situation for Tim kind of going into this. That Ferragraph still is at half HP. We've seen that it can go ahead and take a Moonblast pretty easily. And that Rillaboom is like, hey, what am I doing? There's no grassy terrain anymore. So it's going to be very interesting to kind of see how this plays out as we see that Psychic Noise going into Fluttermane. Fluttermane taking it pretty nicely, and that Woodhammer going directly into that Miraidon, taking it out. So Dan has lost their restricted, and Brick Room is still up. So everything is still moving a little bit slower on Tim's side. So Dan is still there, not out for sure.
Ooh. Yeah, that Moonblast, able to get a knock on the Ferragraph. I think that was maybe a lower roll there on that first Moonblast. That definitely did more than the first one, that's for sure. But the issue here is the Whimsicott and the Ogerpon are going to come in here for Dan. And Ogerpon is going to be a very strong piece under this Trick Room, as you kind of alluded to before. Rillaboom's going to be slower than it, but it's not going to be able to do anything to the Ogerpon. But you're able to just kind of Ivy Cudgel that Fluttermane slot, and you're going to do tons of damage to the Calyrex and the Fluttermane. And of course, super effective damage into this Rillaboom. Whimsicott here is also in a great spot. You can even encore something like the Fluttermane or the Rillaboom here, both of which are going to be not super effective or not effective hits against this Ogerpon. I think either are great encores, and just allowing your supporting your Ogerpon to just fire off attacks under Trick Room is going to be great here.
Yeah, and I think we're really kind of like, as we were talking about that pre-show, is that Ogerpon really is that girl with that Hearthflame mask. Unfortunately, Dan did use their Terrestrialization on their Miraidon, as we both know that Ogerpon really loves to terrestrialize, especially with in that Hearthflame mask variety. But I think you're right. Anything that Dan does with this Whimsicott is kind of in a comfortable position, whether it goes ahead and does a encore, does light screens, but we do see Whimsicott go down to that Woodhammer from that Rillaboom. I think a great play by Tim to make sure, hey, I know it's there, I just want it off of this board state, but also that Ogerpon going for the IG Cudgel into the Rillaboom, taking it out as well. So Tim having that Calyrex and that Fluttermane still in tow, but that Ogerpon being able to take these hits very comfortably on their side.
Yeah, and the thing is here is now that there's no Whimsicott on the field, Tim is very safely able to go for protects on both these Pokemon and slowly stall out Trick Room. With the light screen, though, I am a little scared at how this Fluttermane is going to chip down the Ogerpon. You saw it do 29 damage there. The Ogrephon has 150 HP left, so you kind of have to make a call if you're Dan here which slot to attack. I think attacking the Calyrex makes sense. The Calyrex doesn't go for Protect, though.
Wow.
Instead, eats it instead. Wow, I did not expect it to live that, but I guess with Citrus Berry, you can kind of expect this to live a lot more attacks. The Calyrex is not able to knock out there. Shadow Ball following up. This
Oof.
gets the Ogrephon to 13 HP with that light screen. It's not enough, but knowing Dan knows that you can't take 2 knockouts in the next turn and throws in the towel. And Tim is going to take our round 1-2-0 against Dan.
Wow, what an incredible set, and especially an incredible end game. Like you were kind of saying, I'm very surprised that Ogrepod wasn't able to get the rest of that Calyrex Shadow off of the field. Truthfully, I was like, I'm about to go run the calc because I'm like, wait a second. These are things that I need to know too. Wait a second. So that citrus berry really, that citrus bulky set that Tim is running really kind of came through for them at the end of that game, especially when facing down that Ogrepod. Because if it would have taken out that Calyrex, I do think it would have been really hard for Tim to come back just with that Flutter Mane alone, even with the Shadow Ball kind of in tow with it too.
Yeah, and I think that was a really well played set from Tim. I think just coming into, again, if you are playing the Orabega 6, you know that it has such a large target on its back. You know that people are going to have their game plans into it. I mean, Tim executed their game plan perfectly there into Dan, able to take that 2-0. But I think that's going to be it from us for here for round 1. We're going to cut to a quick break, but we'll be back soon for round 2. Stay tuned.
Awesome. See y'all.